Let me tell you the story of a woman the world almost forgot. Her name was Maria. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. And she never asked for much. In fact, she hardly spoke unless she needed to. She spent most of her days behind the stove at a small, cozy restaurant called Olivia's Corner, tucked away near the edge of town, just across from the city park. Maria was in her early 40s when this story began. She had no family of her own, no husband, no children, no siblings to call late at night. She lived alone in a modest apartment with creaky floorboards, a chipped teacup on the windowsill, and the smell of fried onions that clung to her coat like perfume. Every morning, before the sun came up, Maria would walk to work. She always wore the same faded apron and carried her most treasured possession, a weathered spiral-bound notebook filled with her mother's old recipes. Some pages were stained with oil, others torn at the edges. But to Maria, it was sacred. She was the head cook, but no one really noticed. She was quiet, steady, and never once showed up late. Customers came and went. So did co-workers. But Maria stayed, day in, day out, like the ticking of a clock no one looks at, but relies on all the same. Yet the people who needed her most didn't sit at her tables. They never left tips. They didn't even come through the front door. They came from the alley. One rainy afternoon, about 10 years before the restaurant changed forever, Maria was taking out the trash when she spotted something unusual near the dumpster. A child, a little boy, no older than 7, dirty, curled up in a corner behind some cardboard boxes. His clothes were soaked. His hands were cracked and red from the cold. Maria paused. Their eyes met. But he didn't beg, didn't speak. He just sat there, waiting. Without thinking, Maria returned inside and made an extra sandwich. She wrapped it neatly, added a small carton of milk, and placed both in a brown paper bag. On the bag, she wrote a simple note. "Eat well, sweetheart." She quietly stepped outside and placed the bag beside him. The boy took it with both hands, bowed his head, and vanished into the shadows. The next day, he came back. Same spot, same silence. And again, Maria brought him food. No questions asked. No names exchanged. From that day on, a silent ritual was born. Twice a day, once at noon and again late at night, Maria would prepare an extra meal from her own portion and leave it at the back door. And every day, the boy would appear. He never knocked. He never spoke. But he always came. Maria never asked him where he lived. But one day, as she knelt beside him with a fresh bag, she softly asked, "Where's your mama, baby?" The boy looked down. "She died when I was 5, he whispered. "I ran away from the shelter. Too much fighting." Maria's heart cracked, but she didn't show it. She just nodded and said, "Eat, and don't be afraid." She didn't tell anyone about the boy. Not the manager. Not her co-workers. Not the customers who complimented her cooking, but never asked about her life. She didn't need recognition. She didn't want a medal. All she cared about was making sure that child didn't go to bed hungry. Every afternoon, she'd make a sandwich with a little extra meat. Every night, she'd pack hot soup, or warm chicken or bread with cheese. And each time, she included a handwritten note. "It might rain tonight. Find a dry place. I added an egg today. Protein is good for growing kids. Eat up, sweetheart. See you tomorrow." Years passed this way, quietly, without fuss. But not everyone understood. Some co-workers whispered behind her back, "She's feeding some street kid. He's going to get used to handouts. If customers find out, we'll lose business." One day, the manager pulled her aside. "Maria," he said sharply, "this is a restaurant, not a charity. If I catch you giving food away again, you're out." Maria bowed her head. "Yes, sir." she said softly. The next morning, she packed the boy's food like she always did. Some rules, she believed, were made to be broken, not out of rebellion, but out of love. There were days Maria had little for herself, days when her stomach growled louder than the fryer behind her, when her knees ached, when her fingers shook from exhaustion. But every time she heard the soft steps near the back door, she smiled. As long as he's not hungry, she'd whisper to herself, I'll be just fine. She still didn't know his name, and he still didn't know hers, until one chilly afternoon, nearly a decade later, he left a note. It was folded neatly and placed where the brown bag usually sat. Maria opened it with trembling hands. Miss Maria, thank you for every meal, for every note, for every day you didn't forget me. I've found a job. I'm leaving town. I'll do my best, just like you always did. Love, Daniel. Maria read the note twice, then held it to her chest. The boy she had never truly known was gone. The alley was silent. The brown bag corner remained empty. But Maria still packed a lunch the next day, just in case. And again the next day. And the day after that. Weeks passed. Then months. Then years. She never saw Daniel again. But she never forgot the look in his eyes. The hunger. The gratitude. The silent trust. And deep down, she prayed that wherever he was, he had found a full table, a warm bed, and someone who called him by name. Years had passed since the last time Maria saw Daniel. The little boy who used to wait quietly behind the restaurant for a warm meal and a gentle note. The alley behind Olivia's corner felt emptier now. Cold. Still. The spot where she used to leave the brown paper bag stayed untouched for months, and then years. But Maria never forgot. Even after Daniel left that note, she continued the routine for a while. Not because she thought he might return, but because it was hard to let go of something that had become part of her heart. That simple act of giving had filled her life with purpose. But time moved on. The restaurant changed. New managers came in. The place was eventually bought by a corporate group that believed more in data than kindness. They brought in efficiency systems, updated menus, and consultants with expensive suits and cold eyes. They said Maria's cooking was too traditional. They said her methods were outdated. And after 17 years of hard work, without warning, they let her go. No thank you. No handshake. Just a final paycheck and a reminder that her services were no longer needed. Maria didn't argue. She didn't cry in front of them. She simply packed her old apron, her mother's recipe book, and left with a cardboard box held close to her chest. Outside, it was raining. Cold drops fell from the sky as if the heavens themselves were mourning her silent departure. She stood there on the sidewalk, drenched and forgotten. But inside, a quiet voice whispered, "You did something that mattered." Even if no one else remembers, Maria found a small job at a nearby grocery store. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what she loved, but it paid enough to keep the lights on. She still cooked at home, old recipes from her notebook, and shared meals with her elderly neighbors who lived alone. She remained kind, humble, and unseen, until everything changed because of a stranger. In another part of the state, life was unfolding for a young man who once called the streets home. Daniel, now 22, was stronger, wiser, and no longer the fragile child who lived in silence. He worked as a mechanic in a small repair shop. His hands were covered in grease, and his days were long. But he was proud. He stood on his own feet. He had built something from nothing, and yet he never forgot the woman who fed him. He still carried one of her notes in his wallet, folded carefully and worn from time. It read, "Eat well, sweetheart. I packed extra today." One winter afternoon, Daniel was walking home from work when he saw an elderly man collapse at a bus stop. Without hesitation, Daniel rushed to him. The man was having a stroke. No one else moved. Daniel lifted him onto his back and ran all the way to the nearest hospital. He didn't stop for breath. He didn't wait for thanks. Inside the emergency room, a nurse shouted urgently, "We need ABR-negative blood, rare type. We won't make it to surgery in time." Daniel stepped forward without thinking. "That's my blood type," he said. "I've donated before. Hook me up." And so, Daniel gave his blood, his strength, to save a man he didn't even know. A young doctor watching was so moved by what he saw, he recorded the moment on his phone. Later that night, he posted it online with the caption, "Stranger with rare blood saves elderly man in snowstorm." The video went viral. Millions saw it. One of them changed everything. Thousands of miles away, in a grand New York mansion, a wealthy businessman named Thomas Harrington was having dinner with his daughter. As they scrolled through the internet, she paused at the video. "Dad," she said, pointing at the screen, "this guy kind of looks like you." Thomas glanced up, uninterested at first, but when he saw Daniel's eyes, he dropped his spoon. His face turned pale. There was something eerily familiar about the young man. The way he tilted his head, the quiet determination in his face. He looked like her. Many years ago, Thomas had fallen in love with a woman who didn't fit into his family's world. She wasn't rich. She wasn't from the right background. And under pressure from his father, he let her go. But she had written him one final letter before she disappeared. It said, "If it's a boy, I'll name him Daniel." Thomas's hands trembled as he ordered a private DNA test. He tracked the young man's name through the hospital. Daniel Lewis. No listed parents. No birth records. Just a shared house and a mechanic job. The results came back. Thomas stared at the report, eyes wide. 99.98% match. Biological father. He sat alone in his office, the same room where he had once signed million-dollar deals, and whispered, "He's my son, but who kept him alive all these years?" He didn't sleep that night. He called his father, Daniel's grandfather, and shared everything. They got on a plane the next day and flew to California. It was a quiet afternoon at the repair shop. Daniel was under a car, humming to himself, when he heard a voice call out, "Daniel." He wiped his hands and looked up. 3 men stood in front of him. One older with silver hair, another younger with soft eyes, and a third who looked just as stunned as he was. Who are you?" Daniel asked. Thomas stepped forward slowly. "I'm your father, and this is your grandfather." The words hit like thunder. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He didn't cry. He didn't move. But when Thomas gently reached out and pulled him into a hug, something broke inside him. Years of silence, of sleeping in alleys, of feeling forgotten. All of it spilled out, not in words, but in that quiet, trembling embrace. They sat down nearby, and Thomas explained everything. The past, the test, the regret. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just wanted a chance to be part of Daniel's world. Daniel listened, quietly, then finally spoke. "I don't want money. I don't need a name or a title." He looked them both in the eye. "But there's something you can do for me." "What is it?" Thomas asked. Daniel took a deep breath. "Help me find the woman who fed me for 10 years. I owe her everything." Maria had all but disappeared from the world. After she was let go from Olivia's Corner, the restaurant she gave 17 years of her life to, she slipped into the background of life. Quietly, gently, like a leaf floating downstream. She found a small job at a grocery store nearby, stocking shelves, bagging vegetables. It wasn't what she loved, but it was enough to get by. She didn't complain. Maria never did. But her heart still carried one ache. The boy. The quiet one who had no name for so long, who she fed without question, who left one final note and never came back. Daniel. Every now and then, she would glance at the alley near the back of the grocery store. No reason, really. Just old habits that never truly died. Then one morning, as she poured tea in her small apartment, something unusual happened. A letter slipped through her door. It was printed on thick white paper. Elegant, formal, the kind that looked out of place in her humble home. You are cordially invited to the grand reopening of Olivia's Corner. Maria held the letter tightly. It had been years since anyone addressed her with the word cordially. She almost didn't go. She had no reason to. They had fired her without kindness. Why would they want her now? But something inside her, a flicker of curiosity, maybe hope, led her to walk past the old restaurant just to look from outside. She turned the corner and froze. The restaurant she remembered was gone. In its place stood a freshly painted building with golden light glowing from the windows. And above the door, a brand new sign read, Maria's Table, where every child has a seat. She stepped back in shock. Her name? On a sign? Her hands trembled. Just then, the front door opened, and a young staff member came out. "Excuse me, are you Maria?" the woman asked gently. Maria could only nod. "Please come in. Everyone's waiting for you." The moment she stepped inside, she felt it. The warmth, the respect. Not curiosity, not pity, but quiet reverence. The restaurant looked new, yet somehow familiar. The lighting was soft. The air smelled like roasted garlic and honey. People stood as she walked by. One woman gave a soft nod. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, is that her?" Maria walked slowly, almost like she was dreaming. Then, the sound of engines echoed outside. Heads turned. 5 sleek black Rolls-Royces pulled up along the curb, one after another, like a formal procession. From the first car, a tall elderly man stepped out, dignified, silver-haired, graceful. He approached her slowly, his eyes full of something deep and almost painful. "Are you the woman who fed a homeless boy for 10 years behind this restaurant?" he asked quietly. Maria blinked and nodded. He smiled, his eyes filled with tears. "That boy is my grandson," he said. "My name is Charles Harrington, chairman of the Harrington Foundation." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. But before Maria could say anything, another door opened. Out stepped a young man. He walked calmly, his face glowing with warmth. He came close and stood in front of her, just looking, his eyes soft, familiar, full of gratitude. Maria looked up. Something about him pulled at her memory. The curve of his cheek, the kindness in his gaze. Her breath caught. Then, gently, he placed a small box into her hands. "Do you remember this?" he asked. She opened it. Inside was a small, carefully folded piece of paper. Old and faded, but still readable. Her handwriting still visible. "Today I packed you extra milk. Eat well, sweetheart." Her fingers trembled. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she looked back at the young man. "I've kept this note since before I even knew how to read," Daniel said softly. "You were home to me. You fed me when no one else did. You saw me when the world looked away. And now, this place, this restaurant, it's yours." Maria stood frozen. Her mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time in years, someone truly saw her. Not as a worker, not as a nobody, but as a woman who had mattered deeply in someone's life. She cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming truth that her kindness had not been forgotten. Maria's Table became more than a restaurant. It became a symbol. People didn't just come for food. They came for the story of a woman who had nothing, but gave everything. Lines stretched down the street. Children laughed in the kitchen. Old recipes from Maria's notebook filled the air with delicious smells. But most important of all, Every day, Maria's table served free meals to the homeless. No names were asked. No questions. No judgment. Just knock, and someone would hand you a warm bag with a gentle note tucked inside. Maria never kept the profits for herself. She used them to hire former homeless people, to build a bigger kitchen, to start a foundation that trained single mothers and struggling teens in cooking and hospitality. The Harrington family, once proud and rigid, now stood behind dozens of charities supporting orphanages, shelters, and feeding programs across the country. Some called it redemption. Maria called it what should have been done all along. She didn't want fame. She didn't even want the restaurant. But when Daniel placed the keys in her hand, she took them, because she knew now that kindness, even the quiet kind, has power. A warm sandwich, a soft note, a woman with a broken heart, and a boy with empty hands. Together, they wrote a story that changed lives, not with noise or money, but with quiet, faithful love. Because sometimes, the most powerful things in this world are the ones that happen behind closed doors, by people who never expected anything in return. And that's the story of Maria's table.